Welcome back. This is Bold Like a Leopard, and we're going to talk today about the bursting schism in the Democratic Party and how it is finally impossible for them to hide it from the public. But first, I want you to like the video and please share it. Also, subscribe to me on minds.com as well as on BitChute if you're not getting notifications on YouTube. And if you want, you can subscribe to me on Subscribestar. All three of those, my screen name is @ChefLeopard. So we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And the truth is that the media loves to highlight Cortez because of a few issues that are undeniable. First of all, she cannot shut up. Second, she is one of the most physically attractive people in Congress compared to, I don't know, Jerry Nadler, Maxine Waters. If you're in Congress and you're a reporter and you're looking for somebody to focus on, you would probably look for someone who doesn't look like they've been going to White Castle literally every day and melting into a pile in your chair like Jerry Nadler. So the other reason that they are reporting on her so much is that literally any story that you mention that involves Ocasio-Cortez will get you clicks, and she is a definite moneymaker for the media. In fact, the New York Post, there are days when they feature 3 stories about her. And granted, they are her hometown newspaper, but you don't see many stories about Elliot Engel there, and you don't see many stories about Steve King, or Peter King, who's the Long Island congressman. So I would say that there is a definite agenda at work to report on Cortez because it's good for business. Now, this story is a prelude to a large project that I'm working on. There is something that I've been working on for about a month and a half, where it is my own investigation and it concerns some of the subjects in this story. So let's first read this story by the Washington Post. It says, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi admonished Democrats for personally attacking one another, warning in a closed-door meeting Wednesday that the party's fracturing was jeopardizing its majority. Without naming names, her target was clear: the 4 liberal freshmen known as, quote, the Squad. You got a complaint, you come and talk to me about it, but do not tweet about our members and expect us to think that this is just okay, Pelosi told Democrats. But the Squad, Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley, is convinced that it is Pelosi who is being the bully. The 4 are struggling with the speaker's moves to isolate them in recent weeks, according to interviews with the lawmakers, congressional aides, and allies. Pelosi has made at least half a dozen remarks, dismissing the group for their far-left proposals on the environment and health care. More recently, she scorned their lonely opposition to the party's emergency border bill last month, and she defended those comments Wednesday, saying, I have no regrets about anything. Regrets is not what I do, doubling down on her claim that the group has little power in the House. When these comments first started, I kind of thought that she was keeping the progressive flank at more of an arm's distance in order to protect more moderate members, which I understood, Ocasio-Cortez told the Washington Post. But the persistent singling out, it got to a point where it was just outright disrespectful, the explicit singling out of newly elected women of color. The 4 women are trying to figure out how to respond, texting one another and weighing whether to confront Pelosi to ask her to stop. But for now, they are focused on their congressional duties, even as they defend their votes in the House that have drawn Pelosi's ire. So it's important. In the previous paragraph, it's apparent that Pelosi spoke directly to the Washington Post. By doing that, if it's true what Pelosi said behind closed doors, Ocasio-Cortez is basically giving the big middle finger to her, which is a choice, but then she shouldn't be surprised when Pelosi starts to show her teeth. Thank God my mother gave me broad shoulders and a strong back. I can handle it. I'm not worried about me, said Presley, who called Pelosi's comments demoralizing. I am worried about the signal that it sends to people I speak to and for who sent me here with a mandate and how it affects them. So Ayanna Presley is the congresswoman from Massachusetts. She's from Boston. She also unseated a Democratic incumbent who was deemed a little less progressive than her. The tensions underscore the political and generational divide between the most powerful woman in American politics, who has led House Democrats for more than 16 years, and the new band of liberals clamoring for change and trying to push the party left. So this is something, Tim Pool made a video about this yesterday, and he objected to the idea of calling them liberals. And it's fine, I think, to criticize that, because the truth is that the Democratic Party as a whole includes a number of people who are liberal who would by no stretch of the imagination be acceptable to Ocasio-Cortez and her group of people. Debbie Wasserman Schultz calls herself a liberal. She doesn't call herself a progressive. And I think it's fair for progressives and liberals to distinguish themselves from one another, because I don't think that the two are the same thing. It's really a huge difference of mentality. Even though I don't think Wasserman Schultz does justice to the idea of liberalism, I think that there's a clear ideological division between the Ocasio-Cortez Justice Democrats wing and the rest of the Democratic Party. The four freshman lawmakers, by contrast, have built a wait one second. So it says, and the new brand of liberals clamoring for change and trying to push the party left. Pelosi has spent more than 30 years perfecting an inside game to secure wins for her party, most notably the Affordable Care Act in 2010. The four freshman lawmakers, by contrast, have built a massive online following and leveraged their power on the outside, including in the 2020 presidential race. Their ability to work together or refusal to will have major implications for Democrats as they seek to oust President Trump and retain their majority in next year's election. Pelosi knows that that fate of her majority rests with the moderate Democrats who captured Republican-held seats in last year's midterm elections. So there's also this quote here. The issue is, to some degree, that these ladies are saying that it's a move to isolate women of color. But later in the article, it actually says sometimes a leader has got to take positions to keep the team united, said Representative Gregory Meeks of New York. She knows that what got us here and what's going to keep us here. So without getting into who's right and who's wrong, this is Gregory Meeks. He's a representative from New York. He's a black guy. And the fact is that I don't agree with the idea that this schism has a racial connotation to it. I think that there are certainly issues with Nancy Pelosi. I wouldn't be honest if I didn't say that, but the idea that you're going to smear her as a racist and somebody who marginalizes people of color just because she criticizes people like Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar, it doesn't really add up. And it's something that I think, if it were true, it would be something that's been more instigated by the past year of activity and less by Nancy Pelosi's whole career. Pelosi suggested to New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd in an opinion piece published Saturday that the squad had a limited following inside the House. This is another thing. This is an interview. An interview is not an opinion piece. An opinion piece would be Nancy Pelosi writing the opinion piece herself and then publishing it in the New York Times. This is an interview with Maureen Dowd. She specifically pointed to the example of the House-passed Democratic border bill in late June, which the group opposed. All these people have their public whatever and their Twitter world, Pelosi said in the New York Times interview. But they didn't have any following. They're 4 people, and that's how many votes they got. Several in the caucus were uncomfortable with Pelosi's comments. Congressional Progressive Caucus leaders are expected to talk to Pelosi about her comments, according to 2 officials familiar with the plan. Other women of color in the House have similarly expressed concerns. I can't tell the speaker to apologize, but I was taken aback by it because we're all here to work together, said Representative Johanna Hayes, Democrat of Connecticut, the first black woman to represent her state in Congress. So this is the Washington Post, I would say, taking this subtle slant in the article to highlight a lot of the issues that Ocasio-Cortez is putting out there without really substantiating whether they're valid or not. So Johanna Hayes is a representative from Connecticut, and she does indeed, she is a woman of color. Uh, so this was her. I actually looked her up yesterday, but she's only been in office this year too. And the idea that it's really significant that you would have a person of any race represent Connecticut that's different from before is, again, that's one of the issues that the Democratic Party is creating for itself. It's creating its own problem that it wishes to, or whether it's the Democratic Party itself or it's the Washington Post, they want to dwell on this idea that just because someone is a member of a minority group, that this makes Nancy Pelosi's criticisms of members of the House caucus to be racist. Okay, and that's why it's very difficult for people to really separate your own opinions from these people. I certainly am no fan of Nancy Pelosi's, but to make this idea that she's persecuting Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar and Ayanna Pressley and Rashida Tlaib because they're women of color is, I believe, ridiculous. Notably, Hayes, Ocasio-Cortez, and Omar appear together with Pelosi smiling on the cover of Rolling Stone in a photo taken in January. While some of the four enjoy more diplomatic relationships with Pelosi, Ocasio-Cortez's relationship with the speaker has been chilly from the start. After she upset Representative Joseph Crowley in the Democratic primary, Pelosi moved to immediately downplay her victory, saying it was a one-off event. Still, Pelosi tried to create a bridge with the New Yorker during their first face-to-face meeting just before the midterm elections. Pelosi spent nearly 2 hours trying to convince the liberal. Again, they're calling her a liberal. So the Washington Post is redefining what liberalism really is. Ocasio-Cortez, her policies and her beliefs, whether it is not to bring Amazon to New York, whether it is retrofitting every single structure in the U.S. to be a green structure, whether it is her policies regarding the Middle East, whether it is her policy regarding the migrants. She is not really a liberal. She is an open borders progressive. And that is way beyond the opinions of Nancy Pelosi. Even if you don't like Nancy Pelosi's opinions, and she is not a liberal, she is a far left progressive. Background, it was around that time that Ocasio-Cortez agreed to not only back Pelosi as speaker, but also vocally defend her against rebels trying to keep her from the gavel. So that's a fair point. I think it was in December, there was an attempt by progressives to draft Barbara Lee, who's a veteran representative from California, to replace Nancy Pelosi as speaker. And Ocasio-Cortez was one of the progressives who defended Pelosi, and Barbara Lee herself never ended up throwing her hat into the ring. Now, half a year later, virtually all communication between the two women has ceased. The two have not spoken one-on-one since February, when Ocasio-Cortez declined Pelosi's personal request that she join her select committee on climate change, according to individuals who know both lawmakers. So that is, I think we're seeing here kind of behavior on both sides, where it's obvious that the hostility is actually there, and they don't really want to patch it up. Because on the one hand, you do see Pelosi criticizing Ocasio-Cortez, and you also see Ocasio-Cortez refusing to join this committee on climate change. Just days after, during a private progressive caucus meeting, Pelosi singled out Ocasio-Cortez in front of her colleagues, calling her out for rejecting the select committee offer. Ocasio-Cortez had publicly criticized leadership for refusing to give the committee the power to directly draft legislation. Well, that's the whole problem, Ocasio-Cortez. You don't need a committee to draft legislation. You yourself can draft legislation, being as it is that you were elected to Congress. You don't need the committee to do it. You can do it yourself. You don't even need Nancy Pelosi's permission for it. Since then, Pelosi has made several dismissive remarks about Ocasio-Cortez, calling her Green New Deal the Green Dream or whatever, and suggesting that a, quote, glass of water running as a Democrat could win in districts as liberal as hers. Again, they're using the word liberal. They never say left-leaning because they know that if they were to call it left-leaning, people would object. The third and fourth time she insulted me, it was like, this is unnecessary, but I'm not going to pick a fight over it, whatever. I'll be the punching bag if that's what they want it to be, Ocasio-Cortez said. But now people are telling the freshman to talk to Pelosi. She doesn't want to, however. There hasn't really been a relationship, to be frank, she said. It's difficult. Omar, according to people close to her, has been similarly disappointed. The lawmaker from Minnesota looks up to Pelosi and has enjoyed a positive relationship with the speaker, despite her criticisms of Israel that caused a major stir in the party. Even then, however, Pelosi gave Omar a heads up before chiding her publicly. In one of her conversations with Pelosi after she won her primary, Omar told Pelosi that she couldn't vote on the floor because of a headwear ban in the House. Pelosi promised to change the rules so she could wear the hijab in the Capitol. So this is another revelatory issue. Nancy Pelosi criticizes Ilhan Omar in public, but if she's already told Ilhan Omar and given her a heads up and said, "Hey, I'm going to say this, and don't take this the wrong way," or whatever, well, that criticism is, I would say, rendered irrelevant, because then Omar knows, well, whenever something I say gets Pelosi in trouble, Pelosi will still have my back. So therefore, she's willing to do whatever she wants with impunity. So I'm just analyzing behavior here. I'm not telling people whether what Pelosi or what Omar says is wrong. I'm saying that this implies that the public face of the party is much different from what goes on behind closed doors. For Talib, Pelosi's latest comment amounted to a mixed message, one that seemed to contradict the advice Pelosi gave in a meeting early in her tenure. Represent your district, Talib recalled Pelosi telling her, and that's exactly what I'm doing. That's a fair point, by the way, because Talib, she represents a district that has a heavy amount of people who do agree with her point of view. Hours after her primary win in August, Talib ruffled feathers by saying in a CNN interview that she would, quote, probably not support Pelosi for speaker. But Pelosi, directly and through intermediaries, worked through the ensuing months to keep her mind open, and Talib ultimately voted for her. Talib then won a seat on the Financial Services Committee, a plum assignment for a freshman in a safely Democratic district. And even as she garnered outsized media attention, Pelosi appeared to have her back. When Talib was filmed telling a crowd of supporters in vulgar terms that lawmakers would impeach President Trump, Pelosi delivered only faint public criticism. Whatever it is she's saying is not going to impact my work, Talib said of Pelosi's comments over the weekend. I'm going to continue to introduce legislation and policy. So we've read most of this Washington Post article. Now we have here AOC. This is from the New York Post. Again, they focus a lot on Ocasio-Cortez, and it says AOC calls Nancy Pelosi outright disrespectful for singling out women of color. This again is paraphrasing the Washington Post article. So the type of misrepresentations that this article represents gets magnified by the New York Post. And I want to say this. So whatever one thinks about Nancy Pelosi and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and being disrespectful or whatever, I would say that we're talking about a schism that is real. And let me show you exactly why I think it's disingenuous for Ocasio-Cortez to say, well, she's really targeting us. So this is video of them, Ocasio-Cortez and the Sunrise Movement, occupying Nancy Pelosi's office last year. And no, I don't need antivirus.
I just want to let you all know how proud I am of each and every single one of you for putting yourselves and your bodies and everything on the line to make sure that we save our planet, our generation, and our future. It's so incredibly important. I've shared with you all, and I've shared my story that my journey here started at Standing Rock. And it started with everyday people doing exactly what you all were doing too. You know what? One of the things that I admire so much about Leader Pelosi is that she comes from a space of activism and organizing, and so I think that she really appreciates civic engagement. And really, what I'm here to do is just to support the folks who are here. This is an encouragement of her, and this is to show that we're here to back up bold action, and that she...
So, a lot to unpack there. This was not some sort of spontaneous gathering of grassroots activists. The Sunrise Movement is about as linked up with Ocasio-Cortez as you can be, and that sort of gets into, no more spoilers after this, but really the crux of the project that I'm going to be presenting to you over the next couple months. And you can even see Sekat Chakrabarty in the photo frame. He is her chief of staff. And I think this is her, I might be wrong. I think that this is one of her staff too. I'm not sure. I'll have to confirm that. But and you even have TYT with the microphone to the face. These people were well aware that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would be occupying Nancy Pelosi's office. And the statement here was that beyond everything that Ocasio-Cortez and Nancy Pelosi were discussing at her meeting back before the midterm election, Ocasio-Cortez was not getting elected to Congress in order to be a team player. Ocasio-Cortez is a team player for her team, which is a team of people trying to take over the Democratic Party. So this idea, the press is surprised that there would be a schism between Nancy Pelosi and Ocasio-Cortez is laughable. This is something that is in the works. The idea that you can patch differences over between these people and just have it be all hunky-dory is ridiculous. And I want to finish by kind of speculating exactly how this will affect the party going forward. Now that the schism is open and that both sides are for sure just calling each other out in the media and dogpiling on each other, what will be the effect on the 2020 presidential election? Well, you're going to have a real problem for some of these candidates who are seeking endorsements, because in many ways, seeking an endorsement from Nancy Pelosi will be seen as a net negative for some of these progressives who are supporters of Ocasio-Cortez, and vice versa. You will have some of the people who are Nancy Pelosi supporters or supporters of the quote-unquote moderate wing of the Democratic Party, or the pragmatic wing, or the business Democrats. Those people will start to look at an endorsement by Ocasio-Cortez for any of these candidates, supposing she endorses Elizabeth Warren or if she endorses Bernie Sanders. That will be a huge net negative for people who could potentially vote for those people. So, yeah, we're setting up the stage for a definite tug of war during the primaries between both wings. And I don't think that if you're a Democratic voter, you should really be looking at this as a positive development. In fact, this is, I would say, a worse development than what people made the Tea Party schism to be back in 2010 and 2012. Because, yeah, the Tea Party was trying to unseat incumbent Republicans, but many of those incumbent Republicans were simply people who they were rank and file members of the party, or the party caucus in Congress. They didn't really have much traction in the media. There was no public adulation for them. They weren't on the covers of Vogue. They weren't people who were getting invitations to appear on Jimmy Kimmel Live. Nothing. It was basically, the Republicans were in some sort of tug of war within their party, but nobody in the media really likes the party anyway. So who really cares? In this case, you're talking about the media having to choose between Ocasio-Cortez and Nancy Pelosi as their preferred candidate. And that's really the issue when you're talking about this schism. That's about it. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Also, if you will, please subscribe to me on BitChute and on Minds.com, or donate on Subscribestar. All of those, my screen name is Chef Leopard. You can also find me on Gab at Starscream85 and on Parler as at Razor Ray. Sensual, tender, smooth, sensual.